Hi, I'm Ryan Flynn. I'm a partner at Deloitte Consulting and the lead for our Global CPO Survey. I'm joined here today by Michael Van Keulen, aka MVK. He's the CPO of Coupa, as well as an overall procurement guru. We're here today to talk about the Deloitte 2023 Global CPO Survey. The focus of this year's survey is orchestrators of value. We got input from over 350 procurement organizations across 40 countries. And we're going to talk a little bit about how procurement organizations can do a better job of orchestrating value within their business and what high-performing procurement organizations in particular are doing to bring even greater value to their organizations. So going along with our orchestrators of value theme, one of the findings from the survey was that procurement is taking on more responsibility against a broader set of objectives than ever before. What do you believe has led to the change in expectations for the role of procurement, and how do you see this role evolving moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you go back when I started in procurement, well over a decade ago, I think procurement was always perceived as a functional area that focuses on cutting costs and mainly focused on executing an RFP, handing it over back to the business, and then 3 years later at contract renewal, the business would come back to the procurement team and you would actually just run that whole process again. I think what we've seen over the past, especially 5 years, but even before, we saw a continued acceleration and the realization that procurement, when executed properly, right at the heart of an organization, it would drive competitive edge. It would create more value in the spend rather than just taking out cost. You could improve things like quality, lead time, de-risk your supply chain. I think that realization has been happening over the past decade and especially the past 5 years. And then if you look back at, of course, what happened with the pandemic and some of the other disruptive events we've seen over the past 24 months, is that procurement really now is at the heart of strategic execution. It's a board topic. Of course, environmental social governance has played a direct role into that. De-risking your supply chain even further, business continuity, and really just becoming that competitive edge. And I think that's just been a continued acceleration over the past 24 months. It's something that happened 10 years ago, and I think we will continue to see that in the future.
So we know that value is the North Star for CPOs. And in the survey and in some of Coupa's research, we found that overcoming siloed ways of working is one of the key things for CPOs to be successful. So based on your experience, what are some of the ways that you found are effective in overcoming these barriers in terms of siloed ways of working?
The way to do that is to articulate the value proposition that each and every functional area can have by having full end-to-end spend visibility from a business spend management perspective. I think procurement should lead that conversation. We are uniquely qualified and positioned to be at the heart of that breaking down those silos. But it's the articulating that every single functional area has something to gain, whether it's demand generation and demand planning, whether it's properly closing your books at the end of the month, quarter, and year from a finance perspective, and have proper closing procedures from an accrual perspective, and ensuring proper accounting rules are followed from a SOX perspective, for example, but from the business as well, executing against your objectives, servicing your customers. It's extremely critical. And I think procurement right at the heart, and when executed well by removing those silos, which you do by having end-to-end spend visibility from a BSM standpoint, I think that's just, you become a competitive weapon.
So in this survey, spend and savings performance analytics is a cornerstone for most CPOs. In terms of spend and savings, what KPIs do you feel procurement should really focus on? And what broader measures are critical for them to think about as well?
Yeah, as a finance person by education, metrics matter, right? What gets measured gets done. I think we need to start by saying, if you're in a position where you cannot capture the spend, let's start with that. Capturing the spend is crucial. If you cannot capture the spend, then all else doesn't matter. You can never then justify the value proposition that procurement brings to the table. It's like, if you don't know your checkbook, then how are you ever going to be able to articulate the value that you're driving? So I say, start with capturing the spend. If you then look at the metrics that I, as a practitioner, think are most relevant for me, they are things like, what's your total spend? What's your total addressable spend? But then, okay, now I know my addressable spend. How much of that spend do I have under contract? How much of that spend do I truly influence? So spend on the contract is a key metric for me. But maybe even more importantly, my rec to PO cycle time. How quickly can I serve the business? And if it takes 4 or 5 business days for a requisition to be approved, then obviously the business is going to try to find ways to not go through the procurement process. So rec to PO cycle time is another one. And you should be able to do that in a matter of hours. It should take you 4, 5, 6 business hours to move a requisition to an approved purchase order. The third one that I would say is extremely fundamental and critical is pre-approved spend. I've always believed in approving an invoice is kind of a waste of time, right? Because what are you going to do with that invoice? You're probably going to book it and pay it and approve it and maybe slap somebody on the wrist. But what's more important is before that invoice comes in. So pre-approved spend is the third KPI that I would say is extremely important. And then from an administrative complexity standpoint, I would probably say electronic invoicing, fully digitized, touchless invoicing, if you will, is a key metric. And why is it allows you to take down administrative complexity.
Great. Well, the survey results show that investment in technology and digital transformation are really top of mind for most CPOs. How do you envision further investment in technologies such as Coupa can translate into results for procurement organizations?
Yeah, I think that if you do not have the right, I'm a car analogist. If you do not have the right car, you can never win a race. But you also need to operationalize yourself appropriately, and you need to have the right people in order to service the business. So it's about people, process, and technology. That's the way to get through full procurement maturity and unlock full potential and full value of your spend.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned sustainability before. Let's dive into that a little bit. So one of the main findings from the survey was around the importance of sustainability. And this year it actually rose to the number 2 position in terms of CPO priorities. Taking the S part of that, in terms of supplier diversity, one of the findings was that around 60% of CPOs haven't really defined what diversity means or have a kind of a narrow view of those types of programs. What's your take on the importance of a supplier diversity program?
There's lots of studies out there that prove having diverse supply chain de-risks your supply chain. That's why diversity matters. Your lead times are cut. You're much closer to home, but it's also better for your local communities. Supporting your local communities, that drives local economies. So it's good for your local community. It de-risks your supply chain. But maybe the third pillar that a lot of practitioners don't necessarily think about is it drives innovation. Diverse suppliers are proven to be more agile, more nimble, more willing to collaborate. I've seen this in my own experience as well in my prior companies especially. It gives you innovative, competitive edge. So it's not just good for the community, it's not just good from a risk perspective, but it also drives competitive advantage.
Yeah, I was really impressed yesterday when Rob flashed up it was $43 billion of diverse spend going through Coupa, which is a really tremendous achievement. And we at Deloitte are very much committed to diversity as well. We've made a pledge of reaching, I think, $1 billion of spend with diverse suppliers by 2025. So it's great to hear that. And I would say also it's very interesting because we're having our clients come to us and saying, when you guys field a consulting team, we want that team to look like us. We want you to have a diverse team on site because it's more effective and you can get more done.
Yeah, you actually just made a really good point. From a procurement perspective, we always and often think about diversity as, okay, let me influence the spend, which is extremely critical and definitely don't want to downplay that. But what is also important is that we have a diverse team, because that also drives different outcomes. I'm actually glad that you mentioned that, because that is absolutely 100%.
Yeah, and it helps you influence the business as well, right?
Exactly. Practice what you preach is critical, absolutely.
Great. Well, let's talk about the sustainability aspect of ESG. Sustainability is probably relatively new territory for a lot of CPOs. How do you view procurement's role in sustainability, and how can solutions like Coupa help to achieve sustainability goals at the corporate level?
So I think it's an opportunity for us, yes, to take out cost, but it's also an opportunity for us to protect and preserve the planet, and to be more efficient with the resources that we have been given. So I think a part of it is just education, that I think the procurement function should bring to the business. Together, of course, with most companies now have a head of sustainability, a head of ESG, and then it's up to procurement to help inform and infuse confidence that we can achieve those objectives. You know, if you see some of these companies having scope 3 emission targets, zero carbon, you know, and things of that nature, and it's big, hairy, audacious goals, and procurement should help inform and should help execute against those strategic objectives. And again, it allows us to be strategic because the CEO is often being held accountable for those outcomes.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from a technology standpoint, because sustainability really goes throughout the source to pay life cycle, you know, starting with your sourcing strategies, into sourcing, into your contracts, and then how people buy and how you report on it at the end of the day. Having a end-to-end technology capability is really important to be able to achieve those goals. Let's talk digital for a bit. So compared to their peers, the orchestrators of value place more emphasis on advanced analytics and visualization as their preferred next-gen technology. How do you employ analytics and visualization, and where do you see this capability going with advances in areas like AI?
I think that what you really need is you need technology to inform you in a very proactive way. In other words, if you are still in an environment where you need to take data from one place to put it somewhere else, to then analyze it and maybe try to make sense out of it in a third place, by the time you've done that, the data that you're looking at is old, is probably irrelevant, and is not going to allow you to proactively influence spend. And it shouldn't just be my data. It should be all data that I have at my fingertips. And that's what's at the heart of community AI, as we call it at Coupa. We use it ourselves. It helps inform my category strategies. It helps me to understand the path of least resistance from A to B to C and back to A. And I think that is only as the data set becomes bigger. We now have $4 trillion worth to spend. I think within the next 12 to 18 months, that'll probably be 5, 6, 7 trillion, 8 million suppliers, 3,500 customers. That data set, just the unlock of the value, I think with our human brain can probably not even comprehend today. And I think that's where the power of AI and the power of the human brain together will allow us just to continuously drive more value.
Great. So keeping with the digital theme, you know, one of the findings from the survey was that more than 80% of CPOs reported that digital transformation is one of their key priorities moving forward. However, what we also saw was, I guess not surprisingly, given current economic conditions, procurement technology budgets getting cut. What would you say to a C-suite executive who has yet to pull the trigger on investing in their digital procurement transformation journey?
Rather than focusing on the dollars that you need to invest in a transformation, we should actually flip the script and say, here's the cost of not doing it. Here's the money we're leaving on the table. Here's what we're not able to do. Here's the strategic objectives that we cannot execute. Here is the limitation of our current environment. That could be adoption levels. That could be end-to-end spend visibility. That could be risk and ESG and some of these metrics we're trying to achieve. I legitimately believe that if you are still stuck in ERP, if you are still stuck with solutions that are more point solutions that somehow you need to gobble together with some data lake or something like that, or if you just have some upstream visibility and not downstream visibility, so source to contract, you've maybe digitized, but you are unable to drive that spend down into your organization. If you're in that environment, then I really think that you are missing the boat. I think now is the time during downturn. There are tons of studies out there that companies during a downturn making the right investments are going to far outpace those that are not. You can do three things in crisis. You can freeze, you can run for the hills, or you can fight, right? And build the right infrastructure and build the right ecosystem so that you are able to accelerate once whatever is coming next is gonna turn for the better. And I think this is our time. And executives that are not making those right decisions are not doing right by their shareholders. They're not doing right by their customers, by their employees. But procurement needs to lead this conversation. Nobody else. It's ours to drive.
Let's talk about risk for a minute. So in the survey, over 70% of respondents felt that risk had increased somewhat or significantly over the past 12 months. However, only 26% of them felt like they could predict risk very well in their supply chain. What actions should CPOs take to manage risk? And what does Coupa offer to help them to identify, manage, and mitigate risk in their organizations?
For a very long period of time, we were stuck in our ERPs. We didn't really have the ability for some solution to proactively alert. So in other words, I would do a lot of due diligence before I introduce a supplier into my ecosystem, right? We run a risk survey with 150 different questions, and what are your business continuity plans, and how do you comply with the supplier code of conduct, and what are your business behaviors, and how do you manage your supply chain? And we would do a lot of that before we onboard a supplier. But once that supplier is onboarded, that's when you actually should be close to your suppliers, not before. Because they're, of course, those surveys, you can also arguably say, like, are they really going to give you the right insights? But you want to do that on a continuous basis. And there's data feeds out there. There's community intelligence out there. There's alerts out there on the media. Is a company maybe involved in pollution, or in maybe unfair labor ethics, or modern slavery, and all those types of things? It's almost impossible to do that if you're still stuck in the four walls of your ERP, or you're trying to do that with some download and upload somewhere else and do it with some point solution. So you really need to use it as a fully immersed, right at the center of your organization. And that's right at the heart of what Coupa has built.
Yeah, and maybe a good use case for AI eventually, because there's a lot of information that you're going to get around these alerts. And I think one of the hard things about it is understanding, what really are those red flags? What really do you need to pay attention to? And these days, I think companies tend to throw a lot of bodies at that. But I think technology might be something that can help solve that dilemma and get you to those real risks faster than we have in the past. So last question for you. We're going to talk a little bit about talent and operating model. The survey data suggests that agility in the workforce and talent development is highly desired by all CPOs. How are you changing how work is delivered or enabled within your organization? And what do you see as the main operating model considerations for CPOs?
I think what's important is that operationalization of procurement is that you are at the heart of decision making. In other words, if you are not part of budget cycles, if you're not part of strategic planning, if you are not part of the creative part of landing ultimately to an award, if you're not part of that conversation, if the only thing you do is the business comes to you and says, hey, here's what I'm about to buy and whatever, can you go run me an RFP? You're already behind. You should think about 3 years out, 5 years out. Do I have the right suppliers? Are those suppliers going to constrain me potentially? My point is, operationalization should be about, when do you get involved in the process? That should be very, very early on at the point of ideation. You should be involved in 3 to 5 year strategic planning, because now you can actually drive better business outcomes.
Well, that's all we have time for today. MBK, thank you very much for your time today and your insights. Very valuable, very interesting conversation, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and always a pleasure.